Welcome back. Let's dig into some statistics. So one thing you'll find about this class, GLG110, is that we really need to understand numbers and statistics, because it's not just studying earthquakes, it's studying how earthquakes affect people. It's not just studying volcanoes, it's how volcanoes affect people. So we have to look at numbers and statistics. So what we're going to do, we'll kind of pick each three of these apart, but kind of how they make sense as a whole. And we'll take them step by step. But, you'll be able to look at information like this and make sense, make a story out of all of this stuff. So let's look at that first graph. So what this is showing you is the number of natural disasters versus a 50-year period, 1960 to 2010. I showed you from 1900 to I think 2019, the trend is pretty much the same. Natural disasters are rising rapidly. So the question is, why do you think the number of natural disasters has risen in this 50-year period, or just has risen in general? Remember, a disaster is 10 or more people killed, 100 more people affected, state of emergency declared, or international aid is requested. Why is that? Why are these events that are requiring that becoming more and more prevalent? There's a few. Think about it. You got something? All right. There's a few reasons. One, there's more people. There's more people in this world living in places that they probably shouldn't. The more people, the more land you need, and sometimes people have to move to places that are maybe less desirable, that have an increased chance of a hazard, therefore a disaster occurring. So there's more people. There's more people on this earth. But also, since, we're not just talking about earthquakes and volcanoes, hurricanes and other storms, and this is tied to weather and climate change, that's also an aspect. So since there's just more of a hazard, that can also create more disasters. So more people, just more hazards themselves out there. Can you think of anything else? Think about it. Those aren't the only two things. Those are just kind of two of the more major ones. So there are more disasters because there's more people, and there are certain aspects of the earth that are changing, that are creating more hazards themselves. So now this is a graph that looks at where do those disasters occur. 41% in Asia, 26% in the Americas, 14% in Europe and Africa, 5% Oceania. That's Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, a lot of those Pacific islands. So, question, why do you think Asia has the most natural disasters? There's probably a couple reasons. Why do you think? Can you come up with one? See if this jives with what you're thinking. Well, Asia has the most people. Also, Asia, if you look at a map, typically Asia is the biggest continent. It's got the most people with the most land area. So you're going to get the most disasters. All right. The Americas kind of second on both of those as far as people and area. Well, in fact, in area, the Americas might actually be added all up. It might be bigger. But it's just Asia just definitely has more people. I mean, China and India alone have well over 1 billion people. I mean, I think Asia probably has close to half the world's population, just in Asia alone. Africa and Europe, both smaller, but less people. Europe is a little bit smaller than Africa, but Europe has more people. Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, all those Pacific islands, just less people. So there's more disasters, because remember, disaster affects people. It's not just the event, it's the event that reaches a certain level that affects people. So if you have more people, you're going to have more disasters. So Asia is number one. It's big, and it's got a lot of people. One more. Let me move me out of the way. So this is another interesting graph. So the blue is economic loss. The yellow is deaths. So what this chart is looking at is amount of economic loss, or the amount of deaths, versus per capita income. That's per capita, means per person. So in countries that have a higher per capita income, the United States, England, Germany, typically what's known as first world countries. What you see in higher income countries, when a disaster occurs, you get much more economic loss, but not a lot of deaths. Whereas kind of in a low income country, that's reversed. You get much more deaths, but not a lot of economic loss. Kind of the in-between countries, you kind of get a lot of both. So, why do you think that is? So there's a number of things you can extract from this, but why do you think there are more deaths? Let's just focus on deaths for low-income individuals or low-income countries versus high-income individuals in high-income countries. It's not that hard to kind of think about that one. Think about, a poor nation. Think about a wealthy nation. Why do you think when a disaster occurs, there's going to be more deaths in a poorer country versus in a rich country? Medical, or access to medical care. It's going to be much more prevalent in higher income countries. Better infrastructure, better built buildings, better warning systems in higher income countries. You might not have that in lower income countries. They might not know a particular hazard is coming. When it occurs, the buildings might crumble. They can't get to medical care, so you're going to get more deaths. So when disasters occur, they kind of inversely affect poorer nations versus wealthier nations. So we might have a lot of economic loss, houses destroyed, cars destroyed, buildings destroyed, and those cost money, but life tends to be okay. Now, kind of in the middle here, why this occurs? Well, that's just because most countries in the world kind of fit this bill. Most countries aren't high income. That's very few. Most countries aren't extremely low income. That's few, but still a lot. Most countries in the world kind of fall in between. So all of these statistics, they all kind of tell a story. You can kind of look at these graphs and pick out different things to help tell the story of natural disasters and how they affect the globe. Focusing in on the U.S., so in this past year, in 2021, these are all just single billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. This does not include any kind of more geologic, earthquakes, volcanoes, those sorts of things. These are just weather and climate disasters. And you can see that this map is pretty full. You get wildfires in the west, thunderstorms and derechos, extreme wind events in the middle part of the country, tornadoes in the east and southeast, hurricanes along the Gulf Coast. So these are just, all of these individually cost $1 billion or more. Hailstorms, $1 billion or more. Winter storms, flooding, $1 billion or more. Drought, each of these disasters cost $1 billion or more individually. So on this map, there was 20 separate billion-dollar weather events that impacted the U.S. in 2021. That's not a criteria to become a disaster. You don't need to have $1 billion or more. This is to show you how much each of some of these events can be at the extreme. There was a bunch of other disasters that occurred. These are just billion-dollar ones. Let me move me a little bit again. So looking at select significant climate anomalies and events for 2021. So we'll talk about both, again, kind of internal processy disasters, volcanoes and earthquakes and other things, but also kind of external weather, climate events as well in this class as we go through the units. But just looking at this stuff, 2021 ranked 4th warmest year on record. Climate's changing, it's getting warmer. In most places. Again, for example, in June in Washington and Oregon, tied or exceeded the warmest known temperature values on record for each state. But climate change doesn't only mean global warming. Overall, yes, the globe is warming, but certain spots are getting hotter, certain spots are getting colder. It's not evening out. Overall, the whole world is getting warmer. But climate change doesn't mean things are only getting hot. Climate change means it's getting hotter in some places, it's getting colder, it's getting drier in some places, it's getting wetter in some places. Things are changing. That's not normal. That it is affecting everything. You're like, oh, it's getting cooler in places. Yeah, that could be bad. For instance, in Alaska had its coldest year since 2012. It's probably not a good thing that Alaska is getting colder. It's already cold. It's getting colder. Texas had the coldest event in more than 30 years, kind of a freezing event that knocked out power for nearly 10 million people. But you look, there was a drought in the Plains states throughout most of 2021. But for instance, Fairbanks, Alaska, it had its wettest year on record. Some places are getting drier, some places are getting wetter. You have the deadliest tornado outbreak on record with so tornado events, hurricanes, fifth strongest landfall hurricane to hit the contiguous U.S. CON-U.S. C-O-N-U-S is the continuous U.S. That's the lower 48 states. So climate change is a number of things. It's not just things getting warmer. Yes, overall the world is, but the climate's changing. Some places are getting colder, or warmer, or drier, or wetter, whatever it may be. Again, there were $20 billion disaster events in 2021 in the U.S. All right, but just 688 people died in just these 20 events alone. So overall, that's not a lot considering how many disasters there were. That's still a lot of life. We're going to deal with a lot of death in this class, but 688 people died in just those $20 billion events, of which, there was many more. Damage from these 20 events came out to about $145 billion. There were 21 Atlantic hurricanes. That's the third most in history. So that was 21 hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean. 8 of those hurricanes made landfall on U.S., which is above average. Again, 2021 was the fourth warmest year on U.S. record. By the way, all 6 of the warmest years in the U.S. have occurred since 2012. Climate changing, again, that's on average. It ranks as the 7th hottest year on record for the planet overall. There were 193 tornadoes in December in the U.S. alone. Just in the U.S. in December. When most people think of tornadoes, they think of summer thunderstorms spawning tornadoes in the middle parts of the U.S. 193 tornadoes in December alone. That doubled the previous record. So things are changing. Things are getting weird. Not all of those tornadoes were disasters. Not all of them reached that level of 10 or more people killed, 100 more people affected, state emergency declared, or international aid requested. If there's a tornado and it's just kind of going through the middle of nowhere and it doesn't break anyone's home, it doesn't kill anyone, it doesn't damage any power lines, it's just a hazard. It's not a disaster. So again, there's a difference between those two terms. Please slowly get comfortable with that. So there's a lot of numbers thrown your way. Numbers tell a story. Numbers help to make sense of what's going on out there. So we'll pause. All right. When we come back for the next video, we'll talk about Arizona's natural hazards and disasters. So we'll focus in on close to home. See you back here in just a second.